a subject that's close to our heart at FreeAgent, which is about digital skills. I think, even though the numbers of small businesses have grown a lot in the last 10 years, wages have been static or falling. And I think a lot of that has come from the fact that productivity has not improved really among businesses in aggregate over the last 10 years. When we look at some of the research around that, we see that a lot of that is linked to skills rather than investment or infrastructure, and the pattern is quite varied regionally. And so for us in particular, digital skills is a really important part of that equation that we feel as though we can do something to address. Clearly, as a provider of digital tools, as an accountancy software provider, we see our focus in that part of the financial part of the market. But the skills issue, I think, is a broader one. And I think Lloyds do a good job of tracking how that changes over time with their digital skills index report, which they do every year. And what they've shown is that actually, as a whole, small businesses are getting better at managing digital skills. So they put these things into 5 categories: communicating, creating, managing information, problem solving, transacting. And actually nearly 60% of businesses in the UK have at least some basic capabilities in each of those 5 areas. But what they do see is that about 15–16% have this low capability. They can barely do anything in those areas. And if you sort of say, well, if you could get those guys to be high skilled in those areas and you have the same uplift in productivity, then we're talking about an increase in about £85 billion overall in terms of turnover. Sole traders are particularly bad at this. 41% of sole traders have low digital skills. And again, if you could uplift them into that high category, then we're talking about productivity equating to about £25,000 in turnover a year, which is obviously a massive amount. So this is work that came out a little bit earlier on in the year, but for us that really drives the need to improve digital skills. This is something that the government, I think, has been doing a little bit on with digital skills partnerships, but there's more that can be done there.
For us, we're market leading in small business. That's the best part of 1 million customers across the UK in that small SME market. It's how banks in particular can help. I think we've got a strong track record at NatWest over the years. We run the largest private financial education program in the UK, which is MoneySense, which is a program for 5 to 18-year-old children. It's been running, I think it's 1 in every 3 schools across the UK. So something that's been teaching the fundamentals of managing money to young kids for a long period of time. I think what that does right at that sort of DNA level is give kids that knowledge of managing money, which is as a function, which is quite different from learning, for instance, mathematics. And it gives them some base economics as well, and I think starts to get them interested in the concept of money in the economy, which is a really sort of base level thing. So I think that's one step. I think moving on to entrepreneurship from that is really, really interesting. If you think about entrepreneurship, it's a mindset. Actually teaching that is something that's quite different, but I do think there's a part banks can play because we've had to learn as well. So I don't think banks, traditionally perhaps it was an area that we spent a lot of time on or had thought about. We were working with small businesses, and then I think as society has started to change a little bit, and more people, there's clearly a shift towards self-employment that we've seen, both with our customers and of course more widely in the market. And I think that's encouraged us to think about it in a different way. So the first thing we did was think about our own people, because I don't think we'd be able to take that out to schools if we didn't have that support from our own colleagues. And so we put in place, based on what we'd learned from working with entrepreneurs, we put in place something called our Entrepreneur Development Academy for our own people. That taught them a couple of things, it was teaching them about purpose. So one of the first things entrepreneurs think about is, what am I here to do? And I think as an employed person in a large organisation, you don't always think that way. So that enabled our people to start thinking a bit differently. And also about a growth mindset, which again is something that we feel that entrepreneurs stand out from the crowd on, is their approach to growth. So we put our employees through in the non-personal side of the bank through that workshop. And it's a series of learning modules as well that means that they get to that level of skill. And then we started now to take that out to schools. So we have a program called Dream Bigger, which is particularly focused on female entrepreneurship, which is an area we're really passionate about at NatWest. And we've taken that out to schools to start taking what we've learned from our customers back into schools, such that we're not just focused on the basics of managing money and starting to think about entrepreneurship more broadly. I think that's, you know, I don't think it's for me to say whether the curriculum would do that anyway. I think there are changes to the curriculum happening over time, but I do think actually that partnership between private and public can be really engaging at that level, and it's a way that big organisations like banks can start to give back and start thinking about society more broadly. So I think it's been helpful in that regard.
It's vital that as a society, led by the government, we realise that self-employment is here to stay, and we should be equipping our young people coming out of school, never mind university, with the idea and the ability and at least the principles behind running a business and being entrepreneurs. And there's various organisations. I'm glad to hear that RBS NatWest are looking at that with their Dream Bigger programme. Young Enterprise is another one who go reach out into schools. They have a $5 challenge, which is great. I love this idea, where schools can apply and pupils are given, primary school pupils are given a $5 and told to turn it into a tenner somehow, and probably not by going to mum and dad and saying, can I have an extra $5 please? One of the best stories I've heard about that is four people, young people, primary school age children, clubbed together their $5, bought some buckets and sponges, and created a car wash business, handed back £250 to the school, and continued running their own business. I mean, I think that's fantastic, and we should be doing a lot more of that. The idea that you leave school or university, you go work for a big corporate, and you're there for the rest of your life is so old-fashioned and out of date. Why does the government still run the education system that churns out that type of employee? That would be my big ask of government, is change your outlook, change your mindset, and you generate the entrepreneurs. You'll generate a lot of people who have no intention of growing, but you will also generate a lot of people who want to be the next Richard Branson.